to episode 258 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Andrew Swafford.
Nathan Smith.
And in today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1953's Pickup on South Street. Real quickly, though, we had a big thing on Cinematary, the website, this past week. We're going to be going more in depth on the list on Patreon. So if you have not joined Patreon, please do that because it's going to be very much worth it. But Nathan, I'm going to let you real quickly just kind of give a brief explanation of the list that we put on Cinematary on Monday.
Yeah, this is a project that I've been doing for, I guess, 4 years now or something. I started it in 2016. And it began as, I called it the Film Twitter Mock Sight and Sound poll. If you don't know, the British film magazine Sight and Sound, once a decade, does this poll of critics and directors of what they think are the best films of all time. You know, different people submit top 10 ballots. They're aggregated, and this happens once a decade. It's a really big deal. You know, Citizen Kane has been number one for many years. Vertigo was number one the last time. And I was like, I know all of these people who use Twitter to talk about movies who have very interesting taste, and I would kind of like to see what their sort of sight and sound best of all time list would look like. So I started asking people in 2016 to submit top 10 lists of what they thought, using any criteria, were the best films of all time. You know, the first time we did it, the number one movie was 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it got 9 votes total or something like that, or 12 votes. The second year I did it, the number one movie I think was Vertigo, and it got 50 votes or something. Last year I did it, I think it was 2001 again, and it got 99 votes. And this year,
don't spoil who won this year.
But I will say that it exploded beyond my wildest dreams. And we got 1,300 ballots submitted. I did a Google form and really changed how I did it. We've built a super spreadsheet to make it even easier to do in the future. So this is there are 2 lists. One is 500 films long of the, what this nebulous organism known as Film Twitter thinks are the greatest movies of all time. A very interesting list. A lot of canonical expected things, but a lot of idiosyncratic, unexpected choices show up there. Speed Racer is number 51, for example, something that I'm very proud of. Then the other list is the alternate list, which is basically, as the list grew and grew, it kind of became a little more, for better and worse, a little more canonical. You see a lot more of movies that you just like, that are the classics and the great movies, and things that are, you start to see a little bit less of, at least at the top of the list, of things that are a little weirder or wackier or lesser well known. So to kind of still highlight things that are maybe lesser well known, I started making a version of the list that takes off all the movies that are on the actual Sight and Sound list, that takes off all the movies that are on the IMDb Top 250, and that takes off all the movies that are on the AFI Top 100 American Films list. Just to sort of shake things up. It's a lot more, kind of contemporary, recent list, but I think they're both very interesting and, show a really eclectic profile of a lot of different groups of people online who are cinephiles, who have their own little kind of sub-canons, You see the film bros and the vulgar auturists and the queer Tumblr teens and, the Reddit edgelords or whatever. You see all these just and then you just see random people just from wherever in the world who nominate 10 movies that I've never heard of, people who are into really hardcore experimental things. So I think it's something that I really enjoy doing. It's a lot of work, but it is always for me a fun way to find new films, or to maybe rethink movies and to see what people are thinking about film. So that's on the website right now. I won't spoil anything more about what's on the list. Go check it out.
Yeah, go check it out. It's on cinematary.com right now. But like I said before, for our patrons, we have a very special edition. You're going to see the entire, list of all of the votes that were put in from these 1,300 ballots, as well as we're going to do a little bit of a roundtable chat, kind of going over the results and looking at trends. I think it's always kind of interesting to see what movies and what directors kind of move between the years. So, yeah, please, if you have not done anything with our Patreon, this might be the month to do it. Or just shout out the list in us on Twitter or Facebook. We appreciate it. Let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. I'm going to kick off with a new release real quickly. I'm not going to get into too much detail. I know it's kind of the hot button movie to talk about at the moment, and that's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the latest from Quentin Tarantino. I'm going to wait until more people on the podcast have seen it, because I think it almost deserves like its own part one. It's the only movie where we just kind of deep dive into it. But this is
and Nathan and I have not had time to see it. It's a 2.5 hour movie.
I will say that somebody told me, I really want to see that, but it's a long movie, and I returned with, you saw Avengers Endgame 3 times. This is only 10 minutes longer.
3 times.
So you can watch this movie. You know, if you've seen that 3 times, you can see this movie. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's the 9th movie from Quentin Tarantino. It takes place in 1969 in Los Angeles. You kind of have the fading of the studio system of the golden age of Hollywood, and you see the kind of beginning of the new Hollywood, the kind of countercultural, Easy Riders come out, the Coppolas, the Scorseses, all of them are kind of, in the distance, but it follows a fading television actor played by Leonardo DiCaprio, who is trying to revive his career in movies, but right now is just kind of stuck doing bit parts and playing the heavy on various TV shows and sitcoms and stuff. Then you have his stunt double, who was his stunt double throughout his entire career. He worked on a popular television show called Bounty Law, and the stunt double, played by Brad Pitt, kind of followed him along on that. But now his work has kind of dried up, and so he is working as kind of Leonardo DiCaprio's assistant. He drives him around. He does little handiwork for him, and just kind of is around. He's kind of that dude who doesn't have much going on, but is just around to kind of hang out with. And the other central character is Margot Robbie, who plays Sharon Tate. Of course, that is kind of has a lot of consequence in 1969 LA. And so you have these 3 characters all kind of working and living in this space. For a lot of people have called it like Tarantino's like most calm or sweet or tender movie, sentimental. There's a lot of adjectives they've used. It's definitely his most kind of restrained movie. One of the things I was thinking about today, prior to talking about it for the podcast, was I think especially in his last few, and I'll count Inglourious Bastards, Death Proof to an extent, but Death Proof, Inglourious Bastards, Django, and Hateful Eight, I think that and this kind of also shows the amount of mileage you can take from him, but he leans very heavily on stylizing it and really kind of berating you with that style. His quick edits, the flash violence, just these kind of quick moving moments that have to transition the scene from scene to scene to scene, or just moment to moment, that feels so overly stylized and rushed. And this movie is so leisurely compared to that. This isn't a spoiler, but there's literally a 10 to 15 minute sequence in this movie where Brad Pitt is just driving around LA, and it's Brad Pitt looking incredibly cool, blasting music while just racing down the highway. It's a very leisurely movie. It really just kind of soaks in the scenery, and I think that this is Robert Richardson was the cinematographer on this, and he really, compared to the other Tarantino movies, just kind of, it's a very luscious movie. You have this wonderful sequence late in the film where all of the neon lights of the different theaters and the different sites in downtown LA slowly turn on. It's like this beautiful, it kind of reminded me of the Ave Maria sequence from Ocean's 11, where you just kind of have this slow crawl of lights and neon and and culture all kind of coming to life all at once. but mainly you have these three storylines. Rick Dalton, the Leonardo DiCaprio character, is trying to kind of get his groove back on this television series that he is playing the heavy on, and you spend a lot of time with him on set just trying to get through the day of shooting where he's playing this part. Then you have Brad Pitt's character, who is doing a few things for Leonardo DiCaprio, but then also picks up a hitchhiker who ends up leading him to the Spawn movie ranch where the Manson family is residing at that point, and so he kind of intersects with that storyline. But the one that I think has been getting a lot of attention is the Sharon Tate storyline, and that's the one thing I kind of wanted to shout out before we had a longer discussion. Is I really love the performance by Margot Robbie. I think there's been a lot of talk about her role and how there's a lack of lines, a lack of dialogue from her, and that's something that we can discuss in a future episode. But the thing that
seems like a lot of the concerns that people had about the movie, like, is he going to, how is he going to handle Sharon Tate? Is he going to, like, glamorize the Mansons or fetishize the violence? Or is he going to say the N-word a bunch of times? Like, it seems like...
I don't think he says the N-word at once. Things,
so, yeah, like, he's... From what I've heard about the movie, having not seen it, it seems like all of those things were, like, completely the opposite of what people were worried about. But... there's still a lot of, like, discourse happening, and seems like for good reason.
There's still a lot to talk about, and so that's why, like, I think we can do a whole part one on it. But I think I do want to say about Margot Robbie, and this is more a testament to her than Tarantino's writing, I guess, of Sharon Tate, is that she gives her a lot of life just in her performance. She has this bubbly, lively personality constantly. The scene that a lot of people have pointed to is the scene where she recognizes her name on a marquee and works her way into the movie theater by telling the box office attendant that she's in the movie. And she has this really just wonderful sequence where you have Margot Robbie in the theater watching the actual Sharon Tate performing in The Wrecking Crew, and it's just this really tender, sweet, wonderful sequence while she's just sitting in there completely enveloped, less in what the movie's what's happening in the movie, but what's happening with the people around her and that how they're reacting to her on screen. And you just see, like, there's just so much personality in the way that Margot Robbie is just reacting to all of this stuff that you feel like she's almost bringing back life to what our image and what our perception is of Sharon Tate at this point, rather than just being this Hollywood death. She becomes more of this personality, and I kind of give less credit to Tarantino and more to her, just what she did with the performance. But I enjoyed Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but I'm excited to discuss it more and more further, because I think that there are parts like that I really, really enjoyed, and then there's parts that I really kind of want to talk through, because it's a movie that's good, but it's also a complicated movie. And it's kind of this interesting complication where I don't think at least in my opinion, it's not a movie that you can completely write off, but it's a movie that you can kind of have a mixed feeling about, but still find nuggets of pleasure to enjoy, because I think compared to a lot of his other movies, that just that leisurely quality, I wish he would do. It's really nice. It kind of reminds you of Jackie Brown, where it's way more laid back. It's not assaulting you with style. So yeah, I'll be curious to talk about it more. But yeah, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Andrew, I'm going to toss it over to you.
Yeah, I'm also going to talk about a movie that I'm not going to give my full thoughts on because I'm reviewing it for the site. That'll be out next Monday if people want to go read that essay. But the movie is called The Mountain, directed by Rick Alverson, who I think the film that most people know him for is the comedy with Tim and Eric, which is not a movie that I have seen. Nathan, I know you have seen it. Any just like, what's the TLDR version of what that movie is like?
Yeah, I've seen that film and one of his earlier movies. It's basically about these spoiled, middle-aged, rich boys. It also stars James Murphy of LCD Sound System. Um, and they're just these spoiled, middle-aged brats who have too much money and nothing to do, kind of like sadly gallivanting across Williamsburg, Brooklyn, New York. And
I know there's like a sequence set to the disintegration loops.
yeah, and it's
Is
just
that
sort
right?
of like about these pathetic guys, these just and their their flabby bodies, and that's just sort of like he just makes these movies. I've seen one of his earlier films, New Jerusalem, which has Bonnie and Prince Billy in it. That guy Will Oldham, and it's also just about dudes just like being kind of homoerotic, like.
Having that context might have been helpful for me watching The Mountain because, and I'll give a plot summary of it in just a second, but I saw on Letterboxd that Letterboxd did an interview with Alverson, and he was talking a lot about masculinity and the mythological idealized masculinities of the 1950s, which this movie is set in the 1950s, and it was just not something that I was thinking about at all while watching it. It didn't seem like the movie was pushing me in that, like, towards that reading. But maybe it's just an auteurist thing. Like, you have to have seen his other movies to know this is what he's interested in. But anyways, The Mountain stars, has a crazy cast. Ty Sheridan, who you'll know from The Tree of Life and Mud and Ready Player One, is the protagonist. And he acts opposite Jeff Goldblum in the first half of the film and Denny Levant in the second half of the film. Denny Levant from Beau Travail and Holy Motors, really virtuosic, physical performer. And in this film, Ty Sheridan plays a almost a silent protagonist who's very troubled, in a lot of mental anguish because he is estranged from and grieving various family members. His mother is in a mental institution somewhere. He has not seen her in a very, very long time. His father, played by Udo Kier, dies very quickly into the film. And as he's doing a garage sale selling off some of his father's things, he is approached by Jeff Goldblum, who plays a surgeon of some kind. And apparently Jeff Goldblum is the surgeon who performed an operation on Ty Sheridan's mother, which is why she's now in an asylum somewhere. The procedure that Jeff Goldblum's character is famous for is like a very specific type of lobotomy, in which, and this is something you never see straight on, and for that I'm kind of grateful. You see it from across the room usually, in which he takes two like very sharp silver instruments and like pushes them through a person's eyes into their brain to perform this lobotomy. Don't know how it works. Movie doesn't explain how it works. Doesn't show it to you. I'm glad it doesn't show it to you. But Jeff Goldblum takes Ty Sheridan under his wing. They take a little bit of a road trip, and Ty Sheridan takes pictures of the patients that Jeff Goldblum performs surgeries on before and after the surgery. In the first half of the movie, it's mostly that. In the second half of the movie, Ty Sheridan posts up with Denny Levant, whose daughter is having or has had this procedure done on her, maybe both. And Denny Levant really goes all out here. He plays like this drunken, angry father. He's very gangly, and he just like traipses around like a gorilla at times. There's several scenes where he's drunk and just like yelling at Ty Sheridan's character in ways that are not fully comprehensible. He's also like going back and forth between French and English, and sometimes you can't understand his English and it's not subtitled. He has a painting on his wall of a mountain, and he does a speech about like, what do you think that is? You think it's a mountain? No, it's a painting of a mountain, like the Magritte "This Is Not a Pipe" painting. And so there's the title comes from. I don't understand the significance of the word mountain in this movie. I was left a little cold and a little unsure what to do with the narrative here. It is basically slow cinema, lots of shots of people driving and sitting in waiting rooms, and having like very, very muted conversations with one another. And it felt to me, and this is surely the intention, it felt to me like everybody was playing it as vacant as if they had had a lobotomy performed on them. Like, we are looking back at the 1950s as like this like dead-eyed puppet version of the 1950s where everybody's just like an automaton. And I am not sure what to do. Like I said, not sure what to do with that. The interview really suggests that it has a lot to do with masculinity. I didn't take that from it. Maybe that's a failure on my part. Maybe it's the film not making its themes explicit enough. I felt like the movie itself was kind of vacant, but I'm going to try and work through that in a more detailed way in my essay that'll go up next Monday if you want to go read that.
Cool.
It's a weird movie.
I don't think you could... you gave a solid description, and it already sounded like... I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it'll be on Cinematary on Monday. Nathan, toss it over to you.
Yeah, I got a couple movies I'll talk about really quickly. First off, I got a new TV recently. A very large television, a Toshiba that I got used.
Review your TV for us, Nathan.
For the past, 4 years, I guess, I've had this TV that's 20 inches, which is pretty tiny, which is serviceable, but not ideal, not very great. And I recently got a PlayStation 4, pivoting to gamer life, and there's a lot of text on screen in video games, in case you haven't played one recently. And it's very hard to read on a 21-inch television, so I got this one at a good price, and it's 3 or 4 times the size of that television. It kind of towers over my bed a little bit because it's too close to my bed a little bit. I wish it were further away, but my room is logistically not big enough to move it further away. But it's very nice, It's movies are so much more cinematic now. But because I got this TV, I wanted to watch some big dumb movies for a big dumb TV. So on HBO Go, I fired up 2 blockbusters that I really wanted to see in theaters last year, but didn't because I was too lazy, I guess. Skyscraper with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, directed by Ross and Marshall Thurman,
who made Central Intelligence, which is really good.
Yeah, which is a pretty fun movie. And then The Meg, directed by John Turteltaub, starring Jason Statham. John Turteltaub, of course, of National Treasure, Book of Secrets, Cool Runnings. It goes on and on. 3 Ninjas, also. John Turteltaub, Auteurism for the win. Anyways, Skyscraper, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, in case you didn't know, 2 years ago now, dragged me on Twitter personally, added me, because I said that Jumanji 2 was going to be a flop. It wasn't a flop, but it fucking sucked. So take that. You make shitty movies, and you broke up the Fast family, and I hate you now, Mr. Dwayne Johnson.
Oh yeah, I wasn't even thinking about this, but this kind of like the Vin Diesel Dwayne Johnson double feature, right?
No, because The Meg doesn't have Vin Diesel in it.
Oh, it has Jason Statham, who's not Vin Diesel.
Right. So it's like Hobbs and Shaw. It is Hobbs and Shaw. It's right. I guess you could say I was preparing for Hobbs and Shaw.
Yeah, there you go.
Unconsciously.
Sorry, Vin Diesel.
Skyscraper, is about this the world's tallest building opening up in China, and Dwayne Johnson is this former FBI, I don't know, deep state, whatever dude, who got blown up, and so he has a prosthetic leg, and he retired, put down his gun, became a private security specialist, supposedly working out of his garage, according to his wife, played by Neve Campbell. But they live in a skyscraper in China, so they don't have a garage, and I don't think it's like supposed to be an ironic comment. Anyways, so he is like doing the security test on this skyscraper so it can get approval to be open to residents. He gives it the okay, but some pesky little terrorists try to sabotage and destroy the building because it's owned by a billionaire, and he did some bad things like billionaires are wont to do, and blowback, baby. So this movie is kind of Die Hard, but in a like crazy, totally artificially feeling building that has this wacky observatory at the top that basically allows you to like feel like you're floating atop the city. And, most of this movie is very, like, leaden, dead weight, just, like, totally drained of any kind of life and any kind of visual form. It looks like a fucking, like, CBS procedural show from, like, 2008, like The Unit or something, starring Dennis Haysbert. It's just, like, totally, like, uncinematic and, like, meant to be watched in portions on your iPad as you commute to work on public transit. But there are some shining moments of action movie glory. Anything with Dwayne Johnson and his leg, I think, is fantastic. Like, there's a part where he, like, has to blacksmith his leg, to, like, make it work again, and that's kind of amazing. He's just, like, he's acknowledging that he's a cyborg and his body is a machine, and he's just, like, hammering it back into shape. Also, the aforementioned observatory that, like, allows you to feel like you're floating is used to great, like, lady from Shanghai esque effect. Like Hall of Mirrors. There's a crazy shootout where Dwayne Johnson wields a sword also, which is pretty cool. So there's some reasons to watch this film, I think. The Meg, on the other hand, is absolute fucking garbage, and I will straight up admit that I slept through at least 30 to 40 minutes of this for some reason 2-hour-long movie, which is just like, the trailers were kind of funny, and I thought it might be a good time, but it's just like absolutely draining. Rainn Wilson is this like Elon Musk idiotic startup billionaire, and there's a ancient prehistoric shark that wakes up, and Jason Statham is like this sort of like washed up, like classic like noir protagonist who's like gone rogue in Thailand or something, and they have to go track him down because he's the only one who can defeat the prehistoric shark. And both of these movies are also like these big splashy international co-productions that really try to emphasize Chinese-American relations, and the Meg really is like really trying to pummel that, and Jason Statham has this big romance, and there's like a cute kid, and all of these fucking terrible, awful like co-workers, on this like underwater research facility, people making office banter, but 10,000, degrees below the surface or whatever, and they're like fighting a shark while doing it, and it's just like absolutely like trash. Like, fucking the Meg is so bad. Like, I just didn't, I remembered like halfway through that my boy Eli Roth was the director originally attached to this movie, and just imagining this like funny, hilarious, like gory shark horror movie directed by Eli Roth, like, it made me so mad that I was not watching that movie when I was watching this terrible fucking not movie, like the complete opposite of a movie, honestly. I don't know. It's like
well, didn't they have to do like a lot of reshoots and a lot of re-editing because they weren't sure if it was going to be rated R or not, and everybody was sort of making a different movie?
That's absolutely what it feels like. It feels really just unsure of itself, and also it feels kind of in between in regards to like the action and the violence and stuff, where it's not, I don't know, it's like, it keeps sort of leaning towards that R a little bit, but then ducking away from it, and it's just totally utterly forgettable, and I'm struggling now to like a little bit over a week later really remember anything or anyone in it. There are a lot of people in it who I remember from like Netflix shows. Oh, I guess like Ruby Rose, is that her name? Is in it.
Who's in John Wick 2?
She's in John Wick 2, Resident Evil: The Final Chapter, Triple X3, and there's something coming out that she's in. So she's got a little niche for herself. But this movie fucking sucked. So much worse than any of those movies that I just named. So yeah, I don't know. Those movies are both on HBO Go if you like want to do that with your time. Another movie that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to try to. Can I talk about two more, or should I just talk about one more? What do you think, Zach?
Talk about Popeye.
I think Popeye deserves to be talked about.
Okay, Popeye. So Robert Altman's Popeye, I watched also this week. It's on Canopy. If you still have access to Canopy. Luckily, thank God, my Knoxville Public Library card is still active, even though I don't live there, so I can still hack Canopy and use it. So I watched Robert Altman's Popeye. His live-action musical adaptation of the Popeye cartoons, Popeye the Sailor Man, that classic, had to do it to him.
Make it your ringtone, people.
Robin Williams in actually like his first major part in a motion picture, known as a comic, and for Mork and Mindy, the Very Strange Happy Days spinoff. So this was like, a fucking weird movie, and the product of a lot of dope smoke and a lot of coke, I am sure. I don't know, it's a very strange movie because it feels like of a piece with this sort of, there's a sort of wave, I think, throughout the 70s of revisionism of a lot of different genres. Obviously Westerns and something like Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller. But one of the genres that was being revisited, but people don't really talk about so much, are musicals. You have like Nashville, of course. You have, Bob Fosse's Cabaret and all that jazz. The Phantom of the Paradise. A little bit later, One from the Heart, Pennies from Heaven. Movies that are kind of self-consciously toying with like Hollywood musical form. And Popeye is very much that. It's a musical, lots of singing, breaking out in song, big splashy set pieces, but it's also coming at the end of this sort of auteur-driven big Hollywood era. This is around the same time as like Heaven's Gate by Michael Cimino is a big fiasco, a few years before Ishtar, a few years after William Friedkin's Sorcerer. So this is a sort of kind of like one of the movies that sort of, it's not so great sort of, I actually don't know how it did at the box office, but I don't feel like it did extremely well. But it was sort of, this like expensive movie filmed in Malta, and the set is actually like a tourist attraction now in Malta because it has this crazy set. So it's just like this weird, it's just like this movie that seems like too big and too expensive for what it is, and it's kind of a relic of a very different time of Hollywood. Just like they just let Robert Altman do fucking whatever. The first half hour or so, I was like not at all convinced if it was actually good or not, because there's like not a close-up to be found in it. It's just like everything is very far and everyone is like talking out of the side of their mouth, and it's very hard to understand what they were saying, and the subtitles on Canopy were lagging behind. So, and it just feels also like cut in the strangest way, just like cut with no motivation and no little regard for continuity. But somehow around 30 minutes in, I kind of like develops this just like really weird charm, because on the one hand, it's like super gritty and depressing and about like labor and stuff, and like working in this dumpy like oceanside town, and like, it's about taxes. It's kind of libertarian. It's really weird. so it's like very serious, but then it's like you realize every once in a while you're like, oh, this is like a flesh cartoon, and like Shelley Duvall as Olive Oil will like do something really crazy with her body, or there'll be a lot of like weird like lollipop guild like Fellini looking motherfuckers who have strange bodies, and it just becomes like so, I don't know, it's just like this strange amalgamation of like The Wizard of Oz and Heaven's Gate and McCabe and Mrs. Miller and Waterworld, you know, but like for kids, question mark. I don't know if this is actually intended for kids or not. I don't really know who this was made for. I don't really know what exactly.
That sounded like a demented David Ehrlich tweet. It was McCabe and Mrs. Miller plus it's Waterworld plus, like it was just a weird combo.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just like I don't know what it is. It's just like I don't really understand. I think that there are like stretches of this movie that are really beautiful. It is like, you know, 2 hours long, and by the end, it just kind of, I don't know, it's just like winding in all these different circles and like going in all these different directions, and I'm sort of like not sure at all what's happening or what anyone's relationship really is. But I also like didn't mind it. I don't know. It's just like Altman just conjures up this like totally bizarre environment, and I also feel like, you know, it's like it's kind of weird. I don't know, it's just like because it's, you know, Nashville is this kind of alternative musical, but this is a straight up musical with like actual breaking into song, and his style is just so weird for that because it's like not, it doesn't really feel that choreographed. Like everything is just sort of filmed at a distance. Like everyone's just, you know, everything is so mic'd to death that it's like, you know, Altman's thing is people talking over each other, and so that doesn't really translate like naturally to the musical form. But I don't really know if that's a bad thing necessarily. It's just like such a singular weird movie that somehow escaped from Hollywood that I think it's like I love it just for existing. And I will say, you know, I think that like Robin Williams and Shelley Duvall are both really wonderful and like give these really crazy physical performances and have a very sweet, tender relationship. But it's just like, it's weird. It's weird. Live action. I mean, the original gritty reboot, honestly, Popeye, Robert Altman's Popeye. So there we go. There you have it.
There you have it. Well, we're going to go to the polar opposite of that in part 2 and talk about something not like that. But yeah, let's take a break.
Hey, Cinematary listeners, Andrew here. During this break in the show, I'd like to mention that Cinematary does want your money. You can give us your money at patreon.com/cinematary, where you can chip in a small fee of about $5 a month, you know, the price of a fancy coffee, in exchange for shout-outs in every episode, the opportunity to choose movies we cover on the show, and bonus episodes every month, in which we talk about more movies as well as other miscellaneous stuff. In the past, we've just been humbly asking for you to share the show and engage with us, and we would still love for you to do those things. You can tweet us at Cinematary, send us an email, zach@cinematary.com, leave us a review on iTunes, all that stuff. But Cinematary has grown a ton in the past few years due to the hard work of a bunch of writers, myself included, who haven't been paid for their labor, which is sadly a pretty normal thing. We record things and write things for free, you listen to and read them for free, and the only people getting paid are like Apple and Google, which is depressing. So, if you appreciate what we do, if you feel like there's some sort of value being exchanged here and you'd like more of it, help us normalize paying people by going to patreon.com/cinematary and chipping in $5 a month. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
And welcome back to episode 258. In this part, we will be talking about Pickup on South Street, the 1953 film, as part of our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series. Pickup on South Street was written and directed by Samuel Fuller. The film stars Richard Widmark, Jean Peters, and Thelma Ritter. In New York City, an insolent pickpocket, Skip McCoy, inadvertently sets off a chain of events when he targets ex-prostitute Candy and steals her wallet. Unaware that she has been making deliveries of highly classified information to the communists, Candy, who has been trailed by FBI agents for months in hopes of nabbing the spy ringleader, is sent by her ex-boyfriend Joey to find Skip and retrieve the valuable microfilm he now holds. Darryl F. Zanuck showed Fuller, who was then under contract to 20th Century Fox, a script by Dwight Taylor called Blaze of Glory, about a woman lawyer falling in love with a criminal she was defending in a murder trial. Fuller liked the idea, but knew from his previous crime reporter experience that courtroom cases take a long time to play out. Fuller asked Zanuck if he could write a story of a lower criminal and his girlfriend that he originally titled Pickpocket, but Zanuck thought the title was too European. Fuller had memories of South Street from his days as a crime reporter and came up with his new title. Fuller met Detective Dan Campion of the New York City Police Department to research the background material of his story to add realism, with Fuller basing the role of Tiger, the police detective, on Campion, who had been suspended without salary for 6 months for manhandling a suspect. Fuller turned down many actresses for the lead role, including studio favorites Marilyn Monroe, Shelley Winters, Ava Gardner, who looked too glamorous, Betty Grable, who wanted a dance number written in, and initially Jean Peters, whom he did not like when he saw her in the film Captain from Castile. A September 1952 piece in the Hollywood Reporter reported that Shelley Winters was originally set for the role of Candy, but due to her pregnancy was to be replaced by Betty Grable. Grable refused the role, however, and was placed on suspension by 20th Century Fox. Another report from the Hollywood Reporter noted that Grable, quote, felt she was not adapted for the straight dramatic role, while a modern source adds that Grable believed the role would not be received well by her fans. With only a week to go before the film started production, Fuller saw Peters walk into the studio's commissary while having lunch. Fuller noticed Peters walked with a slightly bow-legged style that many prostitutes also had. Fuller was impressed with Peters' intelligence, spunkiness, and different roles at the studio when he tested her the Friday before shooting started on the Monday. When Betty Grable insisted on being in the film and threatened to cause problems, Fuller promised to walk off the film, and Peters was restored. In August 1952, the script was deemed unacceptable by the production code by reasons of, quote, excessive brutality and sadistic beatings of both men and women. The committee also expressed disdain for the vicious beating of the character Candy on the part of Joey. Although a revised script was accepted soon after, the studio was forced to shoot multiple takes of a particular scene in which the manner of Jean Peters and Richard Kiley frisk each other for loot, which was considered too risque. The French release of the movie removed any reference to spies and microfilm in the dubbed version. They called the movie La Porte de la Drogue, or Drugs Harbor. The managers of 20th Century Fox thought that the theme of communist spies was too controversial in a country where the Communist Party was an influential and legitimate part of public life. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had lunch with Fuller and Zanuck and said how much he detested Fuller's work, and especially Pickup on South Street. Hoover objected to Widmark's unpatriotic character, especially his line, "Are you waving the flag at me?" the scene of a federal agent bribing an informer, and other things. Zanuck backed Fuller up, telling Hoover he knew nothing about making movies, but removed references to the FBI in the film's advertising. In June 1954, Thelma Ritter co-starred alongside Terry Moore and Stephen McNally in a Lux Radio Theater presentation of the story. 20th Century Fox remade the picture in 1967 as The Cape Town Affair, directed by Robert D. Webb and starring Claire Trevor in the Thelma Ritter role, James Brolin in his first leading role, and Jacqueline Bisset. The New York Times in 1953 said, "It looks very much as though someone is trying to out-bulldoze Mickey Spillane in 20th Century Fox's Pickup on South Street. This highly embroidered presentation of a slice of life in the New York underworld not only returns Richard Widmark to a savage, arrogant role, but also uses Jean Peters blandly as an all-corners human punching bag. Violence bursts in every sequence, and the conversation is slangy and corrupt. Even the genial Thelma Ritter plays a stool pigeon who gets her head blown off. Sensations he has in abundance, and in the delivery of them, Mr. Widmark, Miss Peters, Miss Dennis Ritter and all the others in the cast do very well. Mervyn Vai as a cynical detective is particularly caustic and good, and several other performers in lesser roles give the thing a certain tone. Variety in 1953 said, "If Pickup on South Street makes any point at all, it's that there is nothing really wrong with pickpockets, even when they are given to violence, as long as they don't play footsie with communist spies. Film's assets are partly its photography, which creates an occasional tense atmosphere, and partly the performance of Thelma Ritter, the only halfway convincing figure in an otherwise unconvincing cast. Widmark is given a chance to repeat on his snarling menace characterization, followed by a look what love can do to a bad boy act, as Widmark's hard-boiled soul melts before Peter's romancing." On that note, let's talk a little bit about Pickup on South Street. Both of those reviews were kind of, well, the one was pretty, middle of the road, and the other one was pretty negative. But from researching the film, it seems like it's kind of gained more appreciation, post its release. And so I'm curious what you made of the film, kind of in terms, in the kind of wider noir crime context that we kind of have now.
Well, it seems like Sam Fuller, as a director, has had that reassessment just at his whole body of work, right? Like, there's a section of his Wikipedia page that says, like, no one considered his movies to be art when they came out, and only later have they have this critical acclaim around them. And this is a movie that I enjoyed quite a bit, and it's one that I've been excited for all summer. Because I've never seen a Sam Fuller movie before, and there's a number of his titles in his filmography that are really intriguing to me. And I kind of wanted to wait for this because he's this guy whose career spans both old Hollywood and new Hollywood, and I wanted to watch some of his old stuff before working my way towards like White Dog and some of the other titles. And I enjoyed this a lot. I was surprised at just how concerned with like capitalism and communism it was. Like, it's not just the communists are big spooky like shadowy threat because Americans are afraid of communists, so let's make them the antagonist, but like almost every character motivation and interaction in this movie has something to do with financial concern and like trying to extract value from another person, whether it's money or information or whatever. And so I'm sure we'll get like deep into that in a minute. I also really liked a couple of the performances here, Jean Peters and Thelma Ritter especially. I was a little let down by where it ends up. And so I enjoyed the movie, but I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much as you did, Nathan. Maybe you can convince me. My hesitation has to do with like how MacGuffin-y the MacGuffin is. Like, I kind of want to know what's on the tape, even though I know it doesn't matter. It feels like the movie doesn't have like a true climax, and just like the final beat of this movie didn't really work for me, especially in comparison to the too European Pickpocket, which this movie has a lot in common with. But Nathan, what are your thoughts on Pickup on South Street?
So, just to your point about, to Zach, your point about this movie's original reception, and to Andrew, your point about Sam Fuller. Yeah, I think it's important to give a little bit of context, because Sam Fuller was, he was being reconsidered while he was still alive, and he was sort of, while his career was a little bit ongoing, he had a few movies that came out, after he had kind of been recognized as a worthwhile filmmaker. But the critics, later filmmakers of the French New Wave of Cahiers du Cinema, were some of his very early champions. He was a very one of the kind of darlings of early auteurists. And so, these were sort of, for the most part, kind of low down, dirty movies. And Sam Fuller is very interesting because, he not only served in combat in World War II, he was a reporter. So his movies have that kind of very tactile journalistic quality, which I think really shines here in Pickup on South Street, especially. And so I think that, that's kind of like thinking of his movies. That's that sort of just fact about him, about his work, being a reporter, being a journalist.
It's very interested like in the process and how things lead to like what the process is to each point that is you're led to in the narrative. Like you're never kind of, even though Andrew, to your point about the MacGuffin, you don't really know what's on the microfilm. You're kind of filled in for the most part on why the characters are being led and kind of get a sense of where the narrative, or at least why the narrative is leading you to this place throughout.
Right, and so much of it is about like what do the pickpockets do? What are their methods? What are the kind of relationships between the different people in this underworld?
Yeah. I loved that first scene, by the way, of just people exchanging glances on the subway. Especially, thinking about the experience of going on a subway in a time before cell phones where like nobody has anything to do with their time but just like awkwardly look around at one another. But there's a lot of great like point of view shots just to kind of trace the various glances that are happening there, and to see the pickpocketing just very surreptitiously happening between all of that is really well captured visually.
I think that is one of the things that I immediately really loved about this movie, seeing it the first time almost kind of 2 years ago now, was just like the electricity in that opening sequence. And there's something I really like about it. I really like your point about, not being able to like look at anywhere really than other people, or, like at the newspaper or something, because you feel like that tension between Candy and Skip, it really feels to me like, she doesn't know that she's being pickpocketed, but it kind of feels like she's trying not to look at this guy, like right in front of her, which is like, I always feel now this every time we do a movie that is set in New York, I feel like I have to come on to be the like New York correspondent. But like that is just like, a very relatable experience of just like, even in the age of cell phones still, sometimes like, somebody's just like inches from you and you become super aware of that and are like trying to let them know that you're like trying to like look not aware of that. You're trying to like not, you're trying to like look through them or something, or I even feel like there's a very kind of like erotic charge in that sequence, and I feel like there's sometimes like even like you're next to somebody on the train and there's like sexual tension that like is unacknowledged, and you're just like sitting there next to some beautiful stranger, and it's like a weird moment, and I feel like there's kind of that in this like that's something that's like very enticing to me about that sequence, is just like this crime and sex kind of thing going on in this.
That's what I kind of felt in that sequence. I know Nathan's will groan at this kind of comparison, but it seems like it's a sequence that Steve McQueen stole for the movie Shame, where Michael Fassbender's character is on the subway. But I there's something much more like innocent about the kind of sexual tension between Candy and Skip when he's performing the he's snagging the wallet from her, and because the way that Sam Fuller like sets it up, where he's cutting from the close-ups kind of their faces to his hands moving around like in her purse, like there's just kind of like this invasion of her personal space and privacy, but the way that she's looking at him, she's like allowing it. I don't know, it's kind of like this almost taboo-ish thing.
See, I don't know if I read this scene quite the same way. Like I don't necessarily get sexual desire from Candy to Skip. until the very, very, very end of the movie. Like, I imagine that a lot of the stuff happening in the middle is faked for financial gain or strategic gain, and all of the stolen glances in the subway felt to me like they were directed at Candy. Like, you get shots that are like kind of slowly zooming in on her as she's looking away, and then you get the reverse shot of like a guy looking directly at the camera. I mean, maybe I was just like missing hints that she was throwing out, but mostly it seemed like she was trying to avoid the gaze of all these dudes.
It just, at least when it came to Skip, like the way that Jean Peters was like looking at him kind of had, it was almost like she wasn't looking at him, but looking at him at the same time. Not a great description, but
yeah, I don't know. That's what I was meaning of like this way. Yeah, I think I agree with like your assessment of like the general just like body, all of them, the male bodies in that space, but between her and Skip, I feel like there's this like looking of not looking, of like trying to like not look at each other, that is like feels like not like desire to me, I don't think is the word, but there's just a like tension there and a like charge there, which then coupled with this like cutting to this image of like him going into her purse, like feels very to me like there's a like hidden, you know, like under the haze, you know, under the eyes of the Hays Code, you know, something slipping by in my view.
It's like the scene in Night of the Hunter where the knife pops out of his pants. Like, it's like this yeah, like most people are catching on what the insinuation is, but it's completely gliding by the Hays Code. So I don't know. I just really, I agree though. That sequence to kind of kick it off, and you're not really given any preamble to anything else, is really well done and magical.
Well, I think that this is something that I want to, you know, about Sam Fuller that I just want to, that I didn't even think of really like until rewatching this, but that thinking about the other movies of his that I've seen and just seen, you know, people's opinions about him and stuff, it seems to me like this is sort of a like, I don't know, I feel like Pick Up on South Street, you know, like this is very much a noir, but it feels a little bit different to me, both in that sort of like, you know, some noirs a lot of them do have the sort of journalistic documentary tactility, but there's not really a like sort of abstract moodiness here. It's more just like, you know, detailing people's lives and you know, chronicling this world, but also it's like very invested in like the sequence we were talking about in set pieces. So to me, this really feels like this movie and Sam Fuller in general are kind of like very much proto action, where he is sort of working across multiple genres, you know, noir, the Western, the war movie, which all elements of those all kind of later feed into like what we actually see as action movies. But I feel like the way that this movie has, you know, this like opening pickpocketing set piece, and then, you know, at the end has this like subway, you know, fight in the subway set piece, you know, where it's like really using this space and kind of like dragging this conflict through the space, and feels very much like this distinct kind of machine within the movie. To me, that feels like, you know, it's like the seeds of the action movie are kind of developing here a little bit. So that's one of the things that, you know, just to add a little bit more to this discussion, the opening sequence, like that's sort of one of the things that initially just like that really drew me in about this movie, was like seeing a framework, I think, for maybe later kinds of thrillers or kind of, you know,
or even like exploitation movies.
Yeah.
Right.
Seeing like suspense.
It was weird to me. I saw on Wikipedia that like Manny Farber didn't like Sam Fuller.
Oh, that's
and
weird.
After our conversation about Termite Art for the Patreon people, it does seem like the kind of movie that he would like.
Yeah, you know, it has that it's like that underground feel, you know. It's like you said, you know, to bring into some of the bigger ideas, it is this like, you know, brawl in the subway, this kind of like dirty scuffle, but there are these kind of larger things that it's hinting at, and this larger political infrastructure and sort of like this larger political net world that it is sort of gesturing towards.
Well, it's just like this politics of people. I really liked on Letterboxd the review that K. Austin Collins wrote about this film, and he talked about how the thieves and the pickpockets, kind of the Thelma Ritter character and then the character of Skip, they have like they're thieves and they're criminals, but they also kind of have this moral code that they abide by. Like, she is feeding information and giving him away, but he understands why, because he knows that she has to make a living and he's going to do what he needs to do to take care of himself. Like, even though you would think that they're working against each other, there's this understanding and this code amongst them that makes it like cohesive. And yeah, exactly. And so it's like this kind of really symbiotic community of people who understand that they may have to, in the eyes of the larger context, kind of screw one person over, but the other person understands because, yes, they have to eat.
Yeah, it's very... It's interesting that, like, to think about, this movie being dubbed, to not be about this communist plot. In some ways, I can like totally see that, because there's, like nothing visually here to like indicate communism. It's just like men in suits in rooms who sometimes smoke cigars and sometimes have guns and beat up women. It's like that is just this sort of like, there's no iconography, there's no real like discussion of communist ideology. It's just this kind of like void, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like drawn attention to how little exposure the characters actually have to communism. Like, there's the Moe's death scene. She says, "I don't know anything about communists except that I hate them." And meanwhile, she's talking about how she's working herself to death and there's no reason to get up in the morning because all she's doing is making more money so she can like have a nice funeral, right? So like her entire life has been just turned into this dismal tedium by capitalism, but she's blaming communism for that without really understanding why. Which that seems like a knowing line. I don't know what Sam Fuller's politics are, but that seems like a wink.
Well, it's really funny to me. When I saw this movie the first time, I saw it at the Metrograph in New York, and it was like introduced by Sam Fuller's daughter, who I guess had like just made a documentary about him, and that's why they were showing it. And she was like, "Oh, J. Edgar Hoover hated him, but my father was an anti-American and an anti-communist, or no, he was an anti-American, he was pro-American as it was, he was anti-communist, but I don't know. I don't know if he was, communist, but like I definitely agree with you that feels like kind of a knowing line, and like it's so just like transparently blank, whatever communism is in this movie, it's just like whatever capitalism is not, I guess. But I feel like
capitalism is ruining the lives of every character in this movie.
I mean, you see, just like Zach, I think you put it perfectly. It's just like everybody is kind of piecing together these like little hustles. Like every interaction is an opportunity for some kind of exchange, for some kind of financial gain, and that is really why like anybody in the movie for the most part interacts with each other until Candy and Skip like fall in love. There's like, it's just because everybody needs to get something so they can stay alive.
Which again, I don't even know how much I buy that when it's happening in the movie, because I think that she's playing him for gain.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that they're like totally like it's like a valid maybe reading of the movie, like just this sort of like artificial melodrama. I mean, it's like you kind of it says something about movies a little bit, because romance is a ploy to get people in the door, and a way of kind of manipulating an audience. Melodrama is, as much as I love melodrama, it can be just like she could be in that instance, trying to feign these emotions to survive. Like that's what everybody's doing. They're just trying to fucking survive.
But again, there's something kind of like aspirational about their survival tactics, because I think that the capitalists are doing the same thing, where they're trying to gain whatever opportunity over the other person, but they're also just leaving the person. You know, they're screwed over at the end, and there's no like moral code like these thieves and criminals have. Like everybody's doing the same thing in the movie, but only the thieves and criminals have this at least moral streak where even if they're, you know, using each other's information against one another and screwing each other over, they still like are gonna look out for one another. You know, Candy looks out for Skip, Mo is looking out for Skip.
But it's also this kind of just like total delusion, though. It's like this false kind of solidarity. You know, it's like the inmates running the prison ultimately, because what is that doing? It's just sort of like reinforcing this, just like the system that they're in, of like, if it, instead of like getting together and building some kind of like solidarity, it's just like, we're gonna pick off each other, and like, I'm going to get a little information off you, and you're going to get a little information off me, and we're just going to sell that and just keep this cycle going until, you know, Mo dies at the end. And, you know, she dies because she realizes that, like, everything that she's been doing, all of everything that she's done throughout this, that we've seen throughout this whole film, you know, she's always trying to sell a tie. She's always trying to sell a piece of, you know, sell a fact or sell somebody's address. Everything is just like you said, Andrew, to like buy that nice private funeral plot in Long Island and not be, you know, condemned to the anonymity of the potter's field. Like, that is just like the worst fate for her. But it's like, what is that even for? And when she realizes, when that illusion breaks, because there is no like class consciousness, no like collective solidarity around her to like build some kind of network out of that, she just has to die, because that's like, there's nothing else to do, because everybody else is still like trapped in that framework together.
Well, to kind of circle back to what you said, Zach, about how this connects to morality. Skip's character kind of has this moral epiphany or redemption halfway through the movie. I don't know if he goes after Joey and goes after the film at the end ultimately just because he's trying to clear his name, or because he like finally realizes it's the right thing to do because fuck communists or whatever. But the way
I wonder, is it just like even revenge for Candy at that point? Is that it?
Yeah.
Like, I kind of, is it just like pure,
Candy's
like, I just want to beat the shit out of this dude? I mean, because it's just sort of, you know, it just fades from like them fighting in the subway to like the tidy resolution at the police station. It's almost kind of like this, like, you know, it feels just like this total like fantastical, like almost like, you know, this therapist explaining at the end of Psycho, like it's just sort of like,
well,
good, like,
I can't help but compare it to Bresson's Pickpocket, which Zach, I think you haven't seen this movie, but Nathan, you have, right? So
yeah, it's been a while, but
I'm gonna
spoilers.
I'm gonna spoil Pickpocket. But I don't remember all the details. I'm a little fuzzy on it, but the basic arc of the movie is main character's a pickpocket. He gets caught. He accepts the fact that he is caught after a certain point, and when he has accepted it in prison, he is finally able to like have real human connection with someone. And it's like this Christian allegory of, you know, admitting your sin in order to be redeemed of your sin and to live in a sense of purity, right? And what Skip does in this movie is kind of the same thing and kind of the opposite. Like, he's turning over a new leaf, he's changing his ways, but he's also like he's avoiding taking responsibility for the things he's done in a way. It's like a sort of like a capitalist, super independent mindset. Like, I'm going to look out for me, and that is how I'm going to redeem myself, by like finding the best possible outcome for me.
Yeah, there's also, it seems like this kind of idea of like, fuck the system, but because fuck the system, like, I'm not going to bother to do anything. You know, when he says the like, oh, you're waving the flag too, you know, he has this like cynicism and skepticism about this whole world. But, you know, by like opting out just by yourself, you're like still perpetuating the system, because you're pitting you against the system and not really building anything else instead. So he's just kind of this like, you know, libertarian, like fuck everybody but me,
Libertarian, yeah.
Which, but then at the end of the movie, he just sort of like buys back into the whole dream. I guess it's kind of like because Mo dies, Mo has this like kind of awakening, but then dies. Like, what if instead of having the awakening, she goes to Skip, and they're like, hey, like, no, we're just gonna throw the film in the sea and say, fuck you, capitalism, fuck you, New York City.
Yeah. Put the film back with the brewskis at the bottom of the sea. But I guess this circles back to my question of the move, like structurally the movie's ending, because it seems like it actually peaks with Mo's death, which is way before the ending of the movie. And like after Mo dies, it's like everything happens from there just feels like we're tidying up the story as opposed to it continuing to escalate.
I mean, I think that's a valid point, because I feel like, for me at least, it's kind of just like this whole thing is just an excuse to get to Mo. Mo is like the person who binds all of these characters together ultimately, and she is somehow this, like, for me, like, this like perfect embodiment of like something even today in New York that I see, of like people just trying to from in every interaction piece together some kind of getting ahead or some kind of making a living or surviving. Like everything is like, you're trying to turn it into something that can get you to the next bill or the next check or whatever, to the next month. And so it's like, she's this like kind of perfect embodiment of like the scrappy capitalism that is just like a default, that people just like are forced into and can't break out of, and also like Hollywood anti-communism. It's like both of these kind of forces, just the like unthinking, like, this is not us, so I don't like it, and I don't even know what it is. I feel like she is like sums up those two kind of theses of the movie so perfectly in one person. Right, she brings that contradiction together in one person and also brings all the characters together. So I think it's like, that it definitely feels that way for me too, even though I do enjoy that last subway sequence. It definitely, that feels like the emotional kind of climax of the movie. But I just sort of like, I guess it goes to our Patreon exclusive discussion of termite art, where I just love how this like political metaphor and this like emotional story about this just like little old woman who sells ties, is like packaged in with this brutal paperback pulp thriller.
And I think I also agree with your point that that's kind of the end note of the movie, because I enjoyed the subway sequence as well as kind of a callback to the very beginning, and then it becomes just this kind of escalation. But I think that like the very last sequence, the kind of like FU police officer walk away to end the movie, is just kind of, I don't know, it's just flat. And I think that, like you said,
it's like F you by giving you what you want.
Yeah,
they get the film.
And so I think that you really kind of have the emotional catharsis of like an ending whenever you have the sequence with Mo, because everything after that seems almost like a epilogue.
Yeah, it really does.
Anything else on South Street before we move on? I'll just add that this was also one that I was curious to kind of check out, and I really enjoyed it. So I think I might join you, Andrew, in checking out some more Sam Fuller movies, because I thought this was really great.
I still, there are a lot of them, and I still have more to see. If I can recommend, I would, let me see which ones I have, confirm which ones I've seen really quickly. Okay. The Steel Helmet is really good. Like it's one of the few movies that I know or have seen about the Korean War, and it's like very sort of frank and upfront about war in a way that many American war movies are not. Also a little kind of a more underseen one that it was just like, I think it may even be in like public domain or something, and that was why it was like on Amazon Prime at one time. But Park Row from 1952, which is about a newspaper in New York in the 19th century, which sort of has a like the early sequences of Citizen Kane mean? It has that kind of flair to it. But obviously, as somebody who was a reporter and a journalist, it's like, got a really sort of like inside look to it. So it's a period piece, but it's also just like really sharp, like crisp filmmaking, and is really fun. And those are two really good ones. And The Naked Kiss I saw a while ago and don't really remember what I thought of it, but it was interesting. It's pretty, some like shocking, like tabloid kind of stuff.
Naked Kiss, Shot Corridor, White Dog, and then some of the ones you mentioned. I'm definitely planning on working through his filmography a little bit.
There's some riches.
Yeah, no, I'm going to probably be doing that as well. Well, I believe that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary. We post all of the movies that we talked about in this episode. You can also support us on Patreon. Like we said, we're going to have some interesting stuff coming up. Of course, we're in the month of August, so we'll have another Film Theory and Chill coming up during this month, but we'll also have a rundown of the Schmeich and Schmound poll list that Nathan did. It's going to be a good chat, so if you were a fan of that or kind of wanted to learn more about the some of the trends over the past few years, I would recommend checking that out. But thank you to our patrons so far. Thank you, Cam, Chad Newsom, Christopher Metcalf, Eric Dukowski, Graham Jones, Harry Eskin, Maggie, Marie Barty, Matthew Lingo, Miranda Barnwall, Ron Hayes, Tyler Chandler, Whitney Rio Ross, and Will Carroll. Thank you so much for your patronage. We really appreciate it.
We hit our Patreon goal this week.
We did.
Wow.
So, it's exciting.
What's our next goal?
$1 million.
I think we'll probably stay put for the rest of the year, and maybe set a new goal in 2020. But yeah, we're super happy and grateful for everybody who has chosen to support us on Patreon. We hope to give you lots of good, rewarding content.
Yeah, definitely.
In this capitalist exchange system we got going on here.
You scratch my back, I'll, tell you where the person who stole your wallet lives.
Well, coming up next on Young Critics Watch Old Movies, we have 1957's Payasa, which was one I'm honestly most excited to see because I know absolutely nothing about this movie, and it looks kind of interesting. So,
yeah, I'm very excited as well.
That's coming up next week. But thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.